Hello everyone, Metroidvania. This genre is an amalgamation of the classic Metroid games meets Castlevania. Symphony of the Night was the first true Metroidvania game in the genre that I remember. Metroidvania is best described as a game where you have an open world as opposed to a linear path, but there are obstacles stopping you from accessing certain parts of the world. As you visit areas and complete objectives, more and more of the world becomes accessible to you. A form of game design really codified in the early Legend of Zelda games, but perfected within Metroid. A way to sculpt the player experience. Sometimes giving them a single way to advance, other times giving them 10 or more possible side objectives they can do. This is at its heart Metroidvania. There are many examples of Metroidvania these days. A more recent example I'd like to recommend playing is Unepic. Seriously, buy an Epic. But back to the topic at hand. Remember when Metroid was great? Metroid, Metroid 2, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission. The hero Samus Aran didn't need deep characterization. We identified with her through the gameplay, and came to our own conclusions about her character. She was a strong-willed, driven female protagonist. Of course, then other M turned her into a PTSD-ridden wreck who had men telling her what to do the entire game, and had men actually doing all of the important decision-making for her. Rest in peace, good Metroid games. Hello, Federation Force. But in this age of bad Metroid, we've been given Axiom Verge. In this game, you play as Trace.
Don't worry, loves. Cavalry's here.
A scientist blasted to another world. Sounds kinda like another classic game called Out of This World, or in Europe, Another World. He'll spend the entire game doing what women tell him. Giant robot women. When Trace dies, he'll return to life via these rebirth chambers. Like recent games such as Nier Automata or Shadow of Mordor, death is actually acknowledged as part of the plot. Using biomechanical weapons, he will gain constant augmentations in time with his advancement in the main story. So, as you gain more powerful as a player, you gain access to newer areas as well, and the story advances consequently. These augmentations will in turn give you access to newer areas, kind of like backtracking, because in almost all Metroidvania games, backtracking is pretty much mandatory. You'll find barriers and closed paths that you can't get through, with one kind of linear path leading you on, until suddenly you reach a dead end and realize, I've got to go back, but there are so many places I can access now with my new powers. And that's how the game branches out. As you gain your augmentations, the augmentations allow you to nullify barriers or bypass them, and suddenly you rush back to one of those previous areas and go check out what you couldn't see before. This has, since Metroid, since Symphony of the Night, and even now, it's always been an extremely rewarding experience, I find. Even though the developer has handcrafted this frustrating, impossible obstacle, the sudden ability to overcome that obstacle after X amount of time not being able to do anything about it feels amazing. Especially when you just killed an incredibly difficult boss in order to get access to that ability. You earned that reward. You earned the power to overcome those barriers. So what sets Axiom Verge apart from all those other Metroidvania games I love? Well, first and foremost, if you've ever played classic games like Street Fighter 2010 The Final Fight, the pixel art in this game is amazing. The power-ups feel rewarding, The bosses, while starting out very easy, ramp up in difficulty to challenging, and on hard difficulty are even rage-inducing. All of them, however, have some kind of key strategy that once the player understands makes them quite easy. The story, as I mentioned earlier, closely mirrors Out of This World, also known as Another World, where the scientist is suddenly thrown into an alien universe and expected to survive. This, however, is a much more guided experience than the previously mentioned game was, because you have this giant woman who talks to you and gives you a general context as to what your random wandering and boss killing is all doing in terms of the overall plot, and how you're executing these actions as a part of gameplay is tying into the narrative. If you want even deeper lore as to the motivations of the characters and factions that existed prior to the apocalypse of the place that you are right now, there's a series of notes that you can find hidden around the levels which contain that kind of lore, in the same way that audio logs existed in games like Doom 3 and onward. In general, Axiom Verge is pretty much everything I wanted out of a Metroidvania game. And honestly, if they had replaced the main character with Samus and replaced the storyline and just kept the gameplay exactly the same, I probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I would have thought, oh, this is a little bit funky for a Metroid game, a little bit on the weird alien side, but I think it's really cool. It's nice to see Samus in some other planets. Well, obviously not. This is Trace, a scientist lost, and it adds a whole new level of kind of almost cosmic horror to the mix, where instead of being this strong, confident female character, you're this kind of lost, scared guy. Of course, you still get power-ups and augmentations, and you become quite powerful by the game's end, and that's really the point. So if anyone's looking to scratch that Metroidvania itch, I highly, highly recommend Axiom Verge. I picked it up on the Humble Store personally, but it's also available on Steam. And now that you got my recommendation, you can stop watching. Let's spoil the plot a little bit. So, the main character, Trace, is put into this alien world with no knowledge of what's going on or anything like that. So it turns out there's this villain, a human from Earth named Athatos, who came to this alien world many, many decades before Trace did. And he released a pathogen that killed all of these people. And it was done so because of this kind of plot that was unraveling, and how these gods, these women that you talk to, they are more or less suppressing this culture, keeping them ignorant of the greater universe. Now, this particular realm that the game takes place in is a border realm between Earth and its low-level dimension and the greater universe. So in other words, the only thing preventing Earth from getting access to that greater universe is this border realm. Athatos wanted to shatter the border realm in order to expose Earth to the greater universe. And in doing so, he only was partially successful. In trying to kill these godlike machine women, Athatos more or less threw open the doors to the greater universe, not to Earth, but to this border realm. And the corruption and the mutations and everything that's happening in the border realm right now is the fault of Athatos. Athatos is the villain who you have to deal with. And for those of you who don't know, Athatos his name is pretty much based off of athatosis. If you check out some videos on the, let's just say, the worst examples of athatosis, it's rather frightening. But throughout the course of the game, you will learn more and more about Athatos. It'll become more and more clear as you go that things aren't quite what they told you, and that these various gods have different agendas, although they all want to stop Athatos at this point. Whereas Athatos' only real goal is to expose Earth to the greater universe that he feels is really something that it should have. It was humans' birthright to to be able to access the higher planes, whereas these machine gods pretty much say, no, there is only chaos and the loss of material form to be found in this greater universe. So no one really knows until they go there, but no one's allowed to go there. Either way, as you pick up the lore pages, it becomes more and more suspicious until you find out the big, terrible truth. And that is that the main character, Trace, is actually a clone of Athetos that was stored within the rebirth chambers. When Athetos was originally thrown in to this other world, he became obsessed with accessing the higher planes. He crossed countless dimensions, saw all kinds of things which changed him fundamentally as a person. Trace is the version of Athetos that was not lost to these multiple dimensions. And the Trace is simply the ignorant form of Athetos. But Athetos is the grand villain, so you are more or less a clone killing your original, because your original has gone astray and threatens the entire Earth and the border realm and everything. The promise is that you would be returned to Earth at the moment you left, and you would be able to take Athetos' place back on Earth. Of course, a lot of this isn't told to you overtly. You find out about it kind of after the fact as a shock and awe type revelation. So yeah, you suddenly realize that you are Hitler. You genocided an entire race, and now you're able to atone for what your original did. That's one way to look at it. Unfortunately, I found myself sympathizing with Athetos on a certain level, looking at this infinite universe that, yeah, I want to go there, I guess genociding an entire race wasn't really, worth it, but the point is that there is more than one way to look at this, and that is kind of awesome, that the developers actually put in that level of detail into a video game like this, which is essentially just at its core a Metroid clone. Now, the game really does feature different abilities which are very different to Metroid as well, even if the core premise is a Metroid clone. I feel that all these additions transform it beyond the simple, and I would definitely petition the creator to make a sequel, because the game looks great. The game plays great. It's fun. And it definitely captures that nostalgia and delivers on it in a way that is better than the original. That's pretty much it. When you want to capture nostalgia, you have to beat it. Like Shovel Knight did. Like Freedom Planet did. Otherwise, it's never going to live up to expectations. And I feel that this lived up to my expectations. A ringing endorsement all around. Buy this game, play it, check it out on Steam. I will update my Steam curator with this review, obviously. For games like it, I'd recommend Unepic and, of course, Symphony of the Night. Either way, thank you all for watching. I got more reviews in the playlist on screen. Check that out. Drop a comment, leave a like, and I will see y'all next time. The game also has a Justin Bailey code that'll put Trace in a woman's bathing suit. It affects Athetos as well.